Hello and welcome back to Processing the Process, where we capture and discuss the technical, psychological, and contextual dynamics that shape the process of creating a work of art. Week by week, moment by moment, we're following Allie K. Dakers, teacher, actor, director, and producer, as she shapes the development of her innovative middle school drama club and guides the idiosyncratic artistic journeys of her students. And today we'll be focusing on the meeting that took place on November 7th. And we had a pretty big crowd, 26 kids, including one new student. And when Allie described to me the warm-up period, I had to laugh because there was a game she played called the name game, and as you can imagine, it certainly helps with ensemble building on a very basic level in that the kids get to know each other's names. But I'll let you in on a secret. It helps Allie just as much because it's, tough to keep track of a huge number of kids in the club. So I thought that was just fabulous. And Allie's plan, as she described it to me, was to play the stage direction game, which would enable her to divide the stage into different sections and label them and combine it with the emotion-focused lessons you've been working on by assigning a particular emotion to each individual area on the stage. So it was a wonderful plan, but of course contextual dynamics and challenges always come into play, as we know. And as we've spoken about in previous videocasts, Allie, you always look to find ways to turn these challenges that arise in the moment into opportunities. And this gave you actually a really great opportunity because the stage had been redone and painted for the high school production of A Chorus Line. And I know you wanted to be very careful not to damage the stage, and therefore you wouldn't be holding drama club in that setting for very long. But as you described it, you took advantage of it by asking them a number of questions and introducing them to concepts that came out of this setting, and giving them this great sort of behind-the-scenes peek at a production that was about to be performed. So Allie asked them, what do they notice? So start, taking in the details around them visually. Asking why they thought the set designer made these particular choices that they're looking at. Having them think about how space can be changed to suit the needs of a particular production and to tell a story even better. And it was a nice treat to take the show Chorus Line and tell them about it, because it, at its heart, I think is really about life as an ensemble member, the importance of the ensemble, and correspondingly the importance of each individual member of the ensemble. And boy, what a great opportunity to sort of segue right into what it is you do with your drama club.
Yeah, I was actually pretty impressed with one of the kids that I had last year. So she's a 7th grader this year, and she's the one who kind of said, well, you had told us a quote last year. You said, no small parts, only small actors. And I was like, oh my gosh, how did you even remember that? Okay, great, that's awesome. And so I said, that's a fantastic quote. Can anybody else tell me what you think that means? And we sort of went around. The different kids had different ideas about that. We all came to the consensus that it's really the actor that defines themselves on the stage with regard to themselves as a member of something larger. And that despite how small their role is, they're contributing to make that larger thing even better than it would have been without them there.
Right.
In addition to, it's about attitude. being a member of a team, working towards that common goal. And they can't exist without one another. We talked about how, in addition to the set itself being like a character on stage, the set doesn't come alive until we add the people to populate that set. We talked about how leads, while they might get a lot of the glory, they're not necessarily hustling as much as those ensemble players who need to know like 6 or 7 numbers and have to know every single set change because they're almost in every scene potentially. And not that either one is weighted less or more, leads versus ensemble, but really the goal of the conversation was to diminish that boundary line, to recognize that one can't really exist without the other, or the story is not told without both aspects. So it was a pretty good opportunity. And yeah, I had forgotten that the stage was actually completely painted and things had been done to it, that I didn't want the kids with their sneakers and whatnot to scuff it up. But I forgot. I would have potentially planned, okay, we're going to meet somewhere else today, but that turned into a really great opportunity to kind of, like you said, go behind the scenes and pick their brain a little bit about what they're seeing, and they can sort of be invited into the process, knowing that will be their stage soon, and also larger production is what they have to look forward to as well. So
I think you took a very interesting approach, because on one hand, those of us who have been involved in theater at some point or another probably all harbored the preconceived notion of a hierarchy of importance of roles, leads being up here, ensemble being here, and probably heard a lot of rhetoric about, everybody is important. But it seems to me that you really framed it again in terms of the bigger group, the bigger enterprise, and that enterprise can't function without each constituent piece being in place. And to me, that's a little bit different than the, shall we call it, typical party line.
Yeah.
Oh, everybody's important.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That you really gave it a particular kind of context that I think makes sense, and it happens to be true, of course.
Yeah, I don't want to just say, oh no, we're all special and all of this. It's really more about function and creating a product that they can be proud of and that they know that they all participated in bringing to life. So
exactly. So that was very interesting. And then, of course, they're in a position of having to find a place to rehearse, and off they go to the middle school cafeteria, only to find that there is another group there. Yeah. Fortunately, this other group decided to relocate, and you had your space. But I thought, Allie, that given the fact that you told me that sometimes it feels like you're a traveling troupe looking for places to practice and perform, and if that's in fact the case, then it seems to me you need a great deal of flexibility and adaptability, both of which you then model for the kids, because they, I would assume, as actors, are most definitely going to need those qualities.
Yeah, if we can show that the performance space can be anywhere that you make it, then that gives them a leg up, regardless of where they end up in this field, if they end up in this field. But just noticing possibility and recognizing that they can create opportunity for themselves if they want to perform at some point. Any space can be your playing space. So, it's what we turn it into that. So
exactly.
It's not easy. And there are some days where we don't have anywhere to go, and we're in a hallway, and that's okay too. We make it work. So I try to make it as smooth as possible. I try not to show my frustration. And other days I show my frustration because I'm human. So, and that's okay too.
And it's real.
Yeah.
And they'll be frustrated at some point too. And so I would imagine it's also helpful for them to watch you in terms of how you would manage.
Yeah. I try to stay gracious. I understand that people, are where they are, and there's something we can do about that. And politeness goes a very long way. In the meeting that was in the cafeteria, there was like, I've got 20-something kids, you might. And they're like, you're right, we can do this somewhere else. So, okay. But so that respect and showing that and really being gracious makes a difference too. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Behind the scenes, maybe we'll see if I'm cursing anybody that took a spot that I had signed up for. That's a different story. But again, the kids would never see that. That would be my own personal time to get my frustrations out or things like that. So.
But once again, the kids are getting real life lessons and opportunities to experience obstacles of all kinds.
Yeah.
And looking to you, I would think, for information about possible ways of responding, and knowing that these kinds of things won't necessarily throw them to such an extent that paralysis sets in.
Yeah.
In fact, there are ways around it. So very interesting, and I'm sure there'll be many more examples of this.
Yeah, I know that there will be. There is every year as we get down the line, and some of our more critical rehearsal time is actually we have to sort of be that traveling troupe because of other programs happening in the school at that time using the space, which is great.
Right.
But it just happens to be a sensitive time, so the kids do learn how to imagine the space and then transfer what they've done onto a new space, which we'll get into that. That's always exciting. But I am looking forward to that and hoping to kind of streamline some of knowing what's ahead, to streamline a little bit ahead, kind of get ahead of it a little bit and make some other plans ahead of time that I've learned from the past. So we'll see how it goes.
Exactly. We'll keep you posted. Well, finally, Allie and the kids find a temporary home, at least, for this particular day. And it's time to recap the lesson on how actors convey their characters' feelings. If you, our colleagues, recall, what you show and what you know was the tagline along with that lesson. And the kids remembered bits and pieces, but Allie really needed to review some of the key concepts, including creating a whole history of a character. And Allie, since we know learning is iterative, am I right that you circle back to fundamental concepts repeatedly over time to help the kids really internalize that information?
Yeah, I definitely do that. I want them also to kind of own the knowledge, so I'll circle back, like you mentioned. I'll repeat phrases. I'll ask the same questions again, but rely more on the kids to formulate the answers as opposed to me telling them the information. So I'll give them like tag words, clue words, remind them of a game that we played that exemplified the skill. So what was the skill I'm talking about, and pull it from them in that way. So I want to make it their own. I want their language to fill in their, the expression of what it is they're understanding, not my language at this point. So
right, exactly. And you have spoken several times about wanting to make sure that you maintain the students' attention, particularly because there are so many in the club. And I'm wondering, in this particular session, how did you accomplish that goal?
A lot of bopping around. Because if they're moving around, I need to move around to where they are and all of these things. But then there's other times too where if their energy is so high and they've sort of lost control and lost focus, I will do the opposite. And I mean, this is a common modality that teachers use. You bring down the energy, and the energy comes down with you if you're lucky. It's a tactic, doesn't always work, but that's another thing, because you can truly, if you're able to kind of be dynamic in the sense of really catching that one kid with the eye contact and drawing them in, and their friend is like, what's happening over there, then you can sort of pull the focus and quiet the whole space down with your energy. Rather than, just hollering, all right, kids, it's time to get going. That doesn't work 89% of the time. Works sometimes. But a lot of the time it's actually more powerful to take the energy down, because then it piques their curiosity. They're like, so what's the shift? What happened? What's different? And then they'll stop and look around, and then you've gotten their focus back. You've gotten their attention.
Exactly. And I imagine, again, we'll be able to highlight some of these techniques moving forward with actual situations that you encountered and how you managed it in accordance with what you just explained. Well, at this point, they were able to break out into their emotion commotion groups and work on the scenes they had started to develop 2 weeks ago. And again, here was a reminder from Allie. Remember, you want to create a scene in which a change occurs, and it needs to be a change that makes sense in the context of your scene. And interestingly, she also took advantage of this time to introduce a concept, the concept of the dramatic arc, which her veteran students were familiar with, but the new kids were not. And what struck me, Allie, is that rather than actually defining a term or an idea, in this case, but it sounds like in general, you try to use the term in context. Do you find that this is a more effective way to help the kids really learn and understand the concept as opposed to strictly, concept definition and feeding it to them that way?
Yeah, and it depends, because there'll be some days where I am disseminating information in that style. But if I'm in a conference with a group of kids and we're working on something that they're creating, I will pepper in that vocabulary, and I'll use my hand signals, like the dramatic arc. So we're over here right now. Where are we? We want to get up to here. How are we going to get up to there? So I will literally draw out the arc within the air for them, and again, my veteran kids kind of know what that means. They know where the different places are on that arc. So the other kids are starting to pick up on this, and I'll include the language in the context, and if they build their own understanding around that, again, a lot of it is about building their own understanding. All of this will be recapped as a group and discussed again as that larger group. And so then the kids in those smaller groups where I had these conversations are like, oh yeah, that's this, or oh yeah, that's this. And I didn't necessarily tell them exactly that. Like, they figured it out. They put the pieces together.
Right.
And that to me is, that's when you're teaching kids how to think beyond just telling them information, So I'll give them the clues, and I'll be explicit with how I'm speaking, but I won't necessarily just say, this is dramatic arc and this is how we're going to use this. I'll have them create an understanding of what that really means to them and how they're working, and how to then put that into their work as well. So
is this experiential learning in essence?
Yeah, and it's a blend. It is important for kids also to understand how to take information they're explicitly given and then compartmentalize that into what they already know. But I think it's more like synthesizing on the spot, which it's a higher level sort of thinking, for sure. Yeah. But I'm also curious to see, did they pick up on it too? So once we regroup and I say, who can tell me this or who can tell me that, I want to see where they're at. Without just memorizing something that I told them to memorize. That helps me know where to move from, or where we are and where we need to go as well.
Exactly. Well, at this point, we have another example of a challenging dynamic that arose in the moment that was actually handled ultimately in the way that is now becoming familiar to those of us who are following Allie's process, with collective reflection and discussion. In this case, one of the emotion commotion groups consisted of all 6th grade boys who were beginning to use the term shut up rather frequently. So, Allie, could you describe how you handled this situation? Because I was really struck by the fact that rather than coming from a place of authority and talking about norms and rules, such as we don't use that kind of language here, you find a way to meet these kids where they are, so to speak, number one, but you also, as you explained it, position the message to show how actually not doing that benefits them personally and advances their goals, which is a very, very different reframing, rather than putting it into a blaming context and that you're not supposed to do that.
Yeah. I think you make a really good point with the blaming concept. I don't think kids necessarily learn and grow from blame. It turns into shame. It turns into finger pointing. You know, and I don't want to. I'd really rather take these opportunities where, you know, kids are not being nice with one another or disrespecting one another, away from that, and more, like you said, into like productivity and how is this behavior, my behavior, which is a bad choice, really only going to harm me, not so much you harmed them and now you're in trouble. So
right.
Yeah, but I'm across the room and I just hear shut up, and I was like, oh my gosh, okay, and I go over and there's one little boy who's off in the corner like, I'm not in this anymore, I'm not going to do this anymore, and I'm like, and I see this other kid being like, well, your idea's not good, and blah 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 blah. And it was just a lot of the use of the word shut up. And I was like, guys, and this is like kind of getting on their level. I was like, guys, what's happening here? What's going on? Like, this is, all I'm hearing is shut up. I'm like, you know, no one's going to respect you if you just tell them to shut up. They won't respect you. They're going to turn off to listening to you. They're not going to respect your ideas. Like, how are you going to get anything done if no one's respecting what you have to bring to the table? You know, so we sort of unwound the problem. And instead of just being like, who said what and why did you say it, I was like, where's the conflict? Like, where are we disagreeing? So it was more about ideas not really gelling as compared to just one kid being mean to another. So diffuse the situation so that we kind of like bring down the tension or the aggression, because there's a lot of male aggression. They're they're supposed to be. They're testing all that out, and that's good. But it's just a matter of kind of, you know, minding that, bringing it into control. So we took it down a notch. I realized like what the problem was. One kid just was not being heard. Another one felt that he had been dejected with this small little part, you know, that he was just like the sales clerk that was going to sell somebody something. And so I backed it up and said, okay, who are all of you right now? What are we working with at the moment? And how can we make sure that everyone recognizes the importance of their role? That's kind of the angle that I took it on. So that this one kid, he was feeling very, like I said, dejected. And what we discovered when we kind of stepped back and clarified the plot, that his role, while it was very small, was actually a catalyst to the direction that a scene could go either this way or that way. And once he realized that he was so important, he was going to change the whole direction of the scene, it didn't matter that he only had this little moment of a line, you know, and the kids started to understand and the through line of the whole story, which then allowed them to kind of dispel some of that aggression, some of that energy. And then they got into practicing, which was nice. So I said, okay, I'm walking away now. You got this. Everybody knows what they're doing, and we know the goal, where we're headed. I'm walking away. This is now your scene to construct, you know. And I kept my ear out, and I didn't hear shut up anymore, which is good. The scene turned out to be like totally bizarre, but that's neither here nor there. They were happy. Everyone was happy with it, and I don't just want kids to be happy, but they felt like they succeeded, and that was helpful. I mean, that whole conversation was necessary, because later on, I know we're going to run into that again.
Oh, yeah. Without question.
Yeah. So it's actually, I can refer back to that conversation, not even just like, you know, the specific. Like, remember how well you guys did once you realized that, you know, blah, blah, blah. So it was good.
And it's interesting with regard to that particular boy who felt his role was very small. Now thinking back to what you told us in the beginning of the videocast, the bigger picture concept of there are no small roles, and now in an actual situation, this kid feeling, in fact, mine is real small, but it seems like your intervention really helped to boost his self-esteem and confidence, and that sort of helped to then enable the entire group to do what they needed to do, and you know, there was an action, just what you had described earlier. And so Allie essentially was going from group to group to group, assessing what was going on, deciding whether to intervene, and if so, how. And Allie, you shared with me that you observed the kids at a variety of different levels of ability and experience.
Yeah.
And the scenes they were creating were really quite different stylistically. And it made me wonder, thinking about the different levels of experience, do you proactively try to prevent situations where the kids with, say, very little experience and, nascent ability feel perhaps embarrassed about the work they produce relative to their more experienced peers? How can you prevent that from occurring when they're all kind of doing the same thing?
Yeah. Well, I don't know that they're doing the same thing. I wouldn't say that they're doing the same thing. And I point that out. And what I mean by that, it's not to counter what you're saying. It's just, I give credit to every scene as being something, a creation of art. Like, no piece of art is going to be the same. We're going to notice positive things and negative things in everything. Every scene goes through the analyze, critique, compliment process. So every scene is being exposed to things that can be improved upon and things that were done well. And I don't think it's a bad thing to point out that those kids that have more experience are being more successful. And it's not even about being more successful, it's just that their strategies are maybe more intact, and we're seeing some of the concepts that we've talked about being played out more effectively. And it's like an open conversation with the whole group. Like, we have these young kids, look at that, they did this really well. Yes, that was a little, we could improve upon that, and this is how. How do you think we can improve upon that? And the kids will offer the suggestions, the groups within themselves, and taking suggestions from the outside kids that were not in the scene, but that were watching the scene. And that it's about creating that even playing field in terms of not feeling embarrassed or feeling less than. But recognizing the strengths within the group, to know that we can rely on the strengths of each other when we are ourselves struggling with a concept, and that there's always going to be a solution, that we can find. If we put our many different strengths together, we're going to find something that's going to be valuable out of this experience.
So again, coming back to the whole, to the group.
And it's okay, though. Seeing the younger kids, you're going to see these younger, cuter, sillier scenes, and that's okay, because you have the older kids laughing, not at them, but remembering, wow, remember when we used to do things like that too. And it's almost like, it's a kind of like I don't know. It's cute. It's cute. Even the 8th graders will look down at the 6th graders with an adoring kind of oh, they're so cute. It's like, oh, only 18 months ago, but but it's to see them kind of embrace them and be like, wow, yeah, we did that too. It's cute. They recognize that there are different levels within it, and that's okay.
That's really incredible to me. I think that the fact that you have the different levels and can still function as a unit, and that perhaps all of your very conscious attempts at ensemble building lay that foundation, and the whole, everything you talk about as being a collective experience and so forth, perhaps makes it less about, oh gosh, I don't know what I'm doing and I'm in a sea of people who do, as opposed to I'm part of a greater whole, and everybody brings to that whole different things. So I would think that takes a lot of very consciously deliberate setup on your part, right? I would think, to create an environment where that doesn't occur, because I would have thought that, and maybe I'm projecting what I would have felt as a early young kid in this kind of circumstance, oh God, what I did, oh, that was so stupid, or I don't know what I'm doing.
Feeling those feelings is totally fine. I think most of these kids, you would, if you had to label them or categorize, they're brave kids that come out to do this type of work. there's a part of you that wants to be heard by others, you know? So that quality is there. It's the really shy kids that are trying something for the first time or whatever that I'll gently push or put with kids that I know will help bring it out of them or whatever, like, you know. But we have a phrase, I did not coin this. One of my college professors, Quad File, let me know this, and I'm sure he heard it from somebody else. But it's leap and the net will appear. We use that in improv. It's a phrase that's out there and used all the time. So I use that with the kids too. You know, especially if you're that younger kid and you're with these like 7th and 8th graders, like, oh my God, it's like, don't worry, they got you. They will get you. They will catch you. You know, take that risk because they are there and they know more and they're gonna help bring you up to where they are. So definitely like take that leap, take that risk. If you fall on your face, make it big, like, you know, make it a big pratfall. But I don't know, making mistakes is just a part of it, and allowing yourself to fall is so key to this kind of work, to creative work. If you're not gentle with yourself in that, in the sense of not beating yourself up afterwards, you're gonna have a tough time growing. If you don't recognize that it's part of the process, you know, a bone breaks, it grows back stronger in that place that it broke, and the same thing can be said about exploring these concepts and working with people whom you haven't worked with before. The more uncomfortable you are at first, and maybe you have that uncomfortable experience. If I'm doing my job well, I'm instilling in everybody else to make sure that person doesn't feel like they failed. Or at least not that they're a failure, right? Because failure is an event, not a person. That's also, I did not make that up. But if we can understand that the process of failure is okay, that they themselves are not a failure, and that's hopefully if the kids understand that in the work that we're doing, and no one's making them feel like they are a failure, you know, then I've done my job. And if I notice that that's happening, then the conversations will be had. So
and you'll again approach it, I would imagine, as you have. Everything else, you know, in a collective kind of way. So, and I think again, coming back to the theme of creating a safe, containing, nurturing, resonating environment, which we all need throughout our development in general and don't all get. But how wonderful, in my view, that this is an environment where, in fact, those elements do exist. So I'm sure we'll have much more about that as time progresses. But at this point now, we had 3 of the groups about to perform their scenes, and the other 2 slated to present in the following week. So, and Allie planned, as usual, and I think you brought this up a little bit before, to have the analyze, critique, compliment discussion on the part of the folks who were watching the scenes, so that they could really make meaning of what occurred. And interestingly, Allie, you spoke about to the kids about how audiences behave, because now, other than the ones who were performing, the rest were audience members. And I guess in so doing, you set the expectations that you have for them in that particular role. So can you share with us some of the highlights of these 3 very different, very, very interesting scenes that were developed and performed on this particular day?
We'll start with a group of fighting boys. I said they came up with a very bizarre scene. Overall, we had, as audience members during our analyze portion, we couldn't really identify where the change had happened. There was so much going on in the scene itself that we couldn't really identify where they had planned the scene change to occur. So I had them describe with their words. And this is, I introduced another term. I said synopsis, which is obviously synopsis, summary of the plot line. And I didn't say, we're going to say what a synopsis is, and this is what a synopsis means. I just said, give me a synopsis of your scene. Tell me what happened in your scene. So again, just popping in that vocabulary there. Mm-hmm. So they unwound the story, which was very interesting. It was like a Zamboni race, and one of them won, and the other one like got knocked off the Zamboni, and then the kid that won got to like go to the deli and buy the thing he wanted, and it was like that was that Catalyst kid, if you recall.
Yes.
So once they defined for us where the change occurred, they were racing and furious and all of this, and then when the one won or something, he was cheering and he was happy. We didn't really see that, so we decided, what can we do to strengthen those choices? Maybe it's a character thing, maybe it's a relationship thing, and whatnot. But we did decide that they used the stage very well, and they did. They literally were like pushing each other on chairs for these Zambonis. They had like blocked off different portions of where you could be, and we clearly knew that was like the deli or the local shop or whatever it was. So they actually planned their set very well, and they used props, and they used physical things around them, and they also they did a nice job with pantomiming things that they didn't actually have in their hands, which was nice. Okay. But it was just the structure was off, and by having the boys themselves explain the story, they were able to kind of unwind it for themselves and identify where those places occurred. Right. So they knew what was happening. They just weren't very effective in sharing the details with us, and so I'm looking forward to seeing how that develops for them, as particularly a couple of those boys in particular, to see if they can be a little more clarified. The second group, this one was pretty fantastic. Older boys, a mixture of some 8th grade and 7th grade boys. A lot of boys, which is fantastic, I think. Yeah, a lot of boys. It's not that there aren't boys involved. In the beginning, there were a few. Then I had more girls. Like over the course of the years, I would say largely female population. But now it's really evening out over the last 5 years or so, which is great. Yeah,
that is great.
Yeah. So these boys, they're some pretty strong actors, and they have a lot of skill. So they played with emotional mirroring, which was interesting. So it wasn't just an event that caused a change. It was more one character would engage with different characters on an airplane, actually. So the main character, or I guess I shouldn't say main character, but the person who was reflecting all the different emotions, he was like the flight steward. And so he would go up to the different characters who all had their own emotional experiences going on. And as you often see, that whole placating, the service industry, kind of like being like, oh yeah, validating, essentially. Validating the emotions of the people with whom they work. Mirroring all of the different emotions as he went to the different people, completely changing his own demeanor so that he would, as in essence, validate the person that he was working with. And then he gets to one of the last boys on the plane there, who completely shifts. He sort of steals focus, but it was completely on purpose, where the entire energy of the plane shifted, and he was vocal and loud about what was happening. Apparently there was some trouble on the plane and potentially it was going to go down. A little dark, but I don't really hold back, it wasn't, and so all of them reacted. So it was like a mirror, 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 and then the whole thing shifted and everyone became on board with that new mood or the new tone. And that was really mature. And it completely made sense. They had a beginning, middle, end. Everything played well. Their scene structure and the setting, everything was really very strong. So that was really cool. Yeah. And that was, it was definitely a tool. Like using the mirroring concept is a tool that they explored. My third scene was a group of girls, and they had a theme that we often see in middle school girls is betrayal among friends. I see that a lot. I mean, it is a common theme, but just to discuss briefly about some of the differences between if it's all boys or all girls, a lot of time you see maybe, you just see a lot of friend conflict. Yes. Being explored with the girl scenes, whereas you might see more of these more generic ideas. Not that they're any less enriched or valuable to learn from or to explore. It's just I see a lot of that energy sort of and that tension played out by the girls.
Yes.
And explored. And the girls get nasty. and they act nasty, or they act incredibly empathetic. I can't, it's so interesting how these kids will take it to the extreme when they can play in that way. So basically, one friend betrays another, there's two sides, there's groups of girls on either side, blah, blah, blah. And I asked, part of the analyzing, I said, which characters do you feel changed the most? Because we had a lot of different characters shifting how they were feeling. And we took a little, consensus around the room, and most of the kids agreed that it was the two main girls are the ones whose emotions shifted the most. So those tangential characters also shifted, but it was the two main girls, their shift is kind of what created the conflict, which is then where the drama ensued from. So we talked a little bit about how emotion and shifting of emotions and the changing and the fluidity of emotions a lot of time is what's driving dramatic experiences in the context of stories. So that we're definitely going to be coming back to and playing with. And so I was very pleased that they that I didn't have to point that out. The kids pointed that out, and then I can say, keep that in mind, kids. So we'll be coming back to that idea, because that's an advanced concept in terms of structure. You can't really, you can plan that out, but they didn't necessarily plan in their mind consciously, we're going to create this to make the drama, to do conflict, and da-da-da-da. We're just seeing emotions create conflict.
Exactly, and it's interesting because, again, in keeping with what we've been talking about in this video cast, that in this case, this whole idea sort of arose experientially, and then little technical glitch. Making my point, I was going to say that this whole idea arose experientially, as opposed to you're doing a unit on how conflict creates drama. So sort of working backwards, it arose in an organic way, and now you can return to that and develop it more fully. So again, it's interesting that you can sort of work in both directions depending on the context. And finally, Allie, you and I were discussing, when we were discussing the meeting, you brought up a subject that I think is really meaningful. And you said that in some ways, the theatrical environment allows you to really be yourself, especially that funny, silly, goofy self, in a way that you would find hard to replicate in almost any other arena. And I'm thinking back to your history in the theater as you've described it to me, and it seems that you've really felt this way about the theater since you were a young girl. So here you've created this environment that is really a safe space where not only can the kids be themselves, but so can you.
That was a lot of years coming. On the inside, on the inside, I've always been very ready, chomping at the bit for all of these experiences. Like all of us, we go through our, high school, this and that, whatever. Maybe we're not really pushing ourselves as much as we know we can, or there's all these insecurities that come out. And so if I can create a space where these kids are not like ashamed, embarrassed, inhibited, all of those sort of negative feelings that we attach to identifying and expressing who we really are, if I can create a space for them to really explore all of who they are, then that's the whole reason that I'm doing this. I love the craft, I love teaching, I love the what beautiful things can come out of the theater, both in terms of storytelling and affecting society around us and contemplating society around us. But knowing how in the areas that I did struggle to kind of accept all of who I was, and to share with the world all of who I was and am, I wanted to basically provide the arena, and at a younger age. For me, I don't think I really it took a lot of years to kind of come into my own, you know. And I don't think kids should have to spend that many years figuring it out. I want them to have a lot more years actually experiencing themselves and being proud of who they are, you know. And so much, like, the world is such an interesting place now. I mean, it always has been, but there's so much more openness, I think, that's accepted in society, especially in this generation of younger kids and of high school students. We have just a lot of different aspects of ourselves that we're allowed to share with the world now that maybe we weren't before. Breaking down barriers, connecting in ways, you know, that maybe we felt we couldn't. And to create a space where we can really explore all of that is that's what makes me tick. That's what makes me want to, you know, continue with the club. You could honestly, it could be anything. It happens to be theater. You know, that's what makes my heart beat in that way. But the opportunity to create a space for young kids where they can really just kind of spread themselves out, you know, and share who they are with the world that they live in. You know, I feel very lucky to be able to do that.
And they're very lucky to have an environment where they can, as you say, at a relatively early age, because as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking to myself, I want that too. You know, I mean, I think that this is really what you describe is really a lifelong process. But to have the opportunity for that exploration, again, in a safe, containing, nurturing environment early on, really setting the stage for at least the idea of being grounded in your authentic self, and taking that self and bringing it to the surface and using that information to guide your path, which has been, for me personally, the crux of my own journey, and I'm still struggling with that process. So I'm thrilled that these kids have this kind of opportunity and will continue to do so. And I would love to see more environments in other realms where that could happen. I'm not sure it can happen in quite the same way as it does in the theater, but perhaps we can use the theater as a model.
Unique environment. Yeah, there's a lot of rules that we can kind of bend and break and open up and explore. So, yeah.
Well, we'll look forward to hearing about the rules that you bend and break.
To learn them first before we can break them, but
moving forward.
I just don't want the kids to feel bound within themselves because of things outside of themselves. I want them to be able to, you know, let themselves out, share with the world what they are.
Exactly, and we will share with you the dynamics that play out in Allie's drama club that, in essence, enable these kids to do just that. So we hope you'll be with us next week, and we thank you for joining us this evening. Have a good night.
Thank you.